Welcome to the Comic, Science Fiction, and Fantasy Fans Fantastic Forum. I'm Billie Rae Bates, your host for this time around. And we're here at Victory Comics in Falls Church, Virginia. We want to thank them very much for their hospitality. So what are we going to talk about for this episode? Well, some people call them cartoons, some people call them animated series, but whatever you call them, there's been a whole lot of them over the years that have focused on the comic book characters that we love from the printed page. Not just superheroes like Batman and Spider-Man, but also Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spawn, DuckTales, all kinds of characters. So with that, let me introduce today's panel discussion members. We have Abby Pritchard, Roberto Ortiz, and Bryan Lyles. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So let's start the discussion with continuity, because I'm a big fan of continuity. What different series, animated series or cartoons, have you seen over the years that you really feel were true to the character from the comic book printed page? Somebody throw something out there.
I still think the Batman animated series was really true. And it came right after the Michael Keaton movies, where I felt like it was nice and true, very dark, stuck with the characters' origins, and it was very precise, and I like that. The ones that are kind of off, and right now I'm really upset, is the Ultimate Spider-Man on Disney XD. It is the stupidest show right now. I'm just watching it just to waste a good half hour so you can see the show that's right after, which is the Avengers.
I strongly feel that one of the best adaptations that capture perfectly the spirit of the cartoon is DuckTales. DuckTales, basically the adventure of Scrooge McDuck, my favorite Disney character bar none, because it captured the spirit of adventures of the characters. It captured the personalities and made the characters of freaking dogs three-dimensional. And it was, like I was saying to the guys here, like crack for little kids, because I couldn't wait to get home just to watch the adventures of that damn dog. And the thing is that you could tell that the people who were writing the show were true fans of the work by Carl Barks. Basically, most of his adventures, where the DuckTales adventure come from, and he's a father of Scrooge McDuck as a character. And it was just sheer perfection. Your turn.
My personal duck of choice is Darkwing Duck.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to go back to the 90s Batman as a great adaptation. Yeah. I loved it. I think that DC, even over Marvel when it comes to animated universes, has this gift for striking a particular tone. There's real sort of, you can't replicate the mood that they put forward. And Batman, I think, was the most sort of poignant and available of those moods that they really captured, even from the famous sort of opening credits, tiny little mini episode. And I loved that they could sort of expand it. I mean, you know that it's a really great series when it brings characters into the established comic universe. That series gave us Harley Quinn. It gave us Terry McGinnis, who I just love as Batman. I love, and that was another series. Batman Beyond branched off of that, and they went for this sort of futuristic noir that really worked well.
And the whole idea of Bruce Wayne as a character, it's fantastic, presenting him in the future, because the whole idea of Batman, of Bruce Wayne, facing the fact that he's freaking old, and he never expected to get that old, number one.
I love that,
But not just old, he was old and bitter.
Exactly, and it's like, I was supposed to die killing the Joker. What the heck happened?
I love Batman, Bruce Wayne as the old guy hitting people with his cane, even more than I love him as Batman. I'm like, there it is. That's Bruce sort of pulled down into his sort of rawest element, because he can't take out his issues in a physical way so much anymore. So that's what's at his core. This cranky old man who just wants to smack people with his cane and set his dog on them.
And you know he can actually beat the crap out of you if you know.
Oh, yes.
He's still got moves. He's still got moves.
What series can you think of over the years that veered from the continuity of a comic book character, but maybe you still liked it? Like, I can think of an example. I love the Justice League series, And I loved the Jon Stewart, hot girl Shira thing. I loved that, loved that. Of course, I can't get enough of Jon Stewart because he's from Detroit. And Shira's a redhead. But I loved that that element because they built up to it and then they let it go. And then, you know, there was the big betrayal and everything. And then they really brought it back because you knew that the spark was still lit. So where can you think of continuity apart from the printed page that animated series have explored?
I think the animated series, I personally felt that this was its own stories. And it kind of, they wanted to, because as you can tell, the original 7 wasn't, you had Jon Stewart as Green Lantern, not Hal Jordan. And it wasn't Hawkman, it was Hawkgirl. So
more interesting characters.
Yes. So I just think that it was good to see, you know, when we first saw the Justice League, I was drooling when I saw those logos on Cartoon Network just peering out and it's like, oh my God, they're coming back. and then expanding into the Unlimited, I felt that they really got into the depths of each character, how they've grown, how they've changed, but still having that good hardcore storyline of still having Lex Luthor trying to outdo Superman in some form or fashion. And I'll never forget the episode where Superman ended up fighting Shazam. I call him Shazam, but it's Captain Marvel.
Oh yeah.
And that was just, you know, because Captain Marvel, he was supposed to be, hey, I liked you. You know, when you're thinking Lex Luthor is a mean guy, it's like, because he is. And granted, he was doing something evil, but apparently it just, at that last episode, I remember at the end of that episode, I'll never forget, you know, Superman wondering, you know, why things were going wrong and all that stuff, and Batman ended up saying that last line of thinking it's like, you know what's going on here. So I just felt like that show was really, really good. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, had different storylines with different characters and it's completely, slightly veered off. Not fully, like Ultimate Spider-Man. But I just think that it stayed true to the hardcore fans. And another show I think you can add is, I thought, was the Teen Titans, the newer version.
Yes.
Where it slowly progressed going into, you kind of wanted, like, when is Robin and Starfire going to hook up? And sadly, it was the series finale to see them hook up finally. But it was really good to see, you know, that progression of them, you know, being friends and all that stuff.
Dwayne McDuffie, this is a guy that if they had made a Justice League movie, live action, this is the only human being I could think of that could have created it. Because Dwayne McDuffie understood characters. He understood that basically that each and every one of these personalities in the Justice League was an individual character, and he made it click. And the reason, for example, the Spider-Man cartoon is not working is because for some bizarre reason, the showrunners of that cartoon seem to have forgotten the lessons that Dwayne McDuffie brought to the table, that character is important. Don't follow cliches.
I'm actually going to go off of that. I mean, I think in terms of continuity, it's a fuzzy question to raise with comics because even comics have so many different branches of continuity. You know, you can have debates for hours about what counts as canon in the Batman universe or whatever. And I think if you keep the characters sort of true to themselves and true to their circumstances, then there's a certain allowance that you can go off of. I think a good example of this, I love the new Young Justice show.
Yes.
I think that's really solid. And there was this great scene where all of the characters had sort of been sucked into this simulated universe, but they forgot that it was a simulated training exercise, and so they watched all their friends die, and they were having this breakdown afterwards. And Black Canary was giving these sort of individualized therapy sessions, and you get to see Robin break down and be like, I don't want to be the Batman anymore. I couldn't handle it. He has this sort of single-mindedly, anything is acceptable for the loss of the mission. I don't have that. And the great thing was, this was of course a particular Robin, but you could see the voices of like all the Robins in there, and the different aspects that they can and can't bring to the table as part of the Bat family.
See, that's the cool thing about Batman, that you know that you're going to have post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah. That was another thing that they had in that, because Superman was determined to ignore Superboy, and when you're getting parenting advice from Batman, and it's the correct advice, You know you're screwing up.
Okay, well, with that, we are coming to the end of our first segment, and we're going to be back.
We're here in Beyond Comics today with writer KURT Busiek. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be here. Every time I'm out here in Maryland, I like to stop in at Gaithersburg's Beyond Comics. They're old friends, and it's a great store.
What got you into reading comics?
Once I was old enough to start ignoring the rules my parents set down, I would occasionally stop in at the local pharmacy and I'd buy a comic book and I'd read it on the way home, and then I'd throw it away before I went home because my parents, they were opposed to there being comics. And it wasn't until 1974 when I was 14 and there was an issue of Daredevil that came out that I bought kind of on a whim. And it was part one of a 4-part story. And it had all of these references to past history, not just past Daredevil history, but things that happened in the old Nick Fury series and Thor and Marvel Team-Up. And that made me realize I loved reading books that were series books. So if you liked it, you could get the next one and find out what happens next. And this wasn't just a series. It was a whole world where what happened to Thor in one comic might matter to Daredevil 4 years later. What happened to Spider-Man over here might go and affect, Iron Man. So I wanted to see more of that. And by the time that 4-issue story in Daredevil was over, I'd found a comic book store. I'd started buying comics regularly. I'd started saving them, and my parents, at this point we were old enough, so they figured either he's sensible or he's not sensible, but he gets to make his own choices.
Say you're writing a Superman, or you're writing something that has a ton of history behind it. Do you feel like a sort of responsibility to basically add to the mythology, or do you want to tell the best story that you can possibly tell?
Well, I mean, both to some degree. It used to be when I'd start working on an assignment, I'd make sure I had everything. So, the first regular series I wrote was Power Man and Iron Fist, and I only wrote it for 12 issues. But when I got it as a regular series, I went out and I got all the back issues of Power Man. I already had most of the back issues of Iron Fist, but I got the ones I didn't have, and I read through them, looking for characters, looking for storylines, conflicts, things that I could build on and do new stuff with. And that extended all the way to when I took over Avengers. I made sure I had a complete run of Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Ms. Marvel, Wonder Man. If he was an Avenger, I had their solo series as well. And then I wrote Defenders, and I did that too. But over at DC, where they kind of interrupt their history every now and then and start things over, it's less important to know all of the details of the past as it is to know the spirit of it. So if I've read all of Superman of the 1970s, well, the Superman who's being published today isn't the same guy, but he's informed by that legend. So I don't have to know that at such and such a time, while Superman was at this stage in his relationship with Lois, he fought a guy named Microwave Man, and this sort of thing happened. But I could say, well, that Microwave Man story, that was an interesting story. And I could do a new version of that character and play with those conflicts in a new way. So it's more like when the guys at Warner Brothers Animation did Batman the Animated Series, they took the history of Batman and they boiled it down into all the cool stuff and made a new legend of Batman that was faithful to the spirit of Batman, even though it wasn't exactly the same history as any version of Batman. Doing Superman, doing Batman, doing Wonder Woman, that's the sort of thing you do. You say, I need to do this series in a way that is respectful of the legend, but it does not have to hew to every single detail because they keep blowing up the history and starting over.
Right.
But still, I view the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe as sort of this big complex structure that people have built. And I'd like to add, you know, a new wing to it, or a new room here, or a new tower, and do something that could be a lasting addition.
Right.
Not just recapitulating what's been gone before, not just kind of wandering through the halls of the structure and saying, let's have a pleasant time touring this, but bring in something new, add something that builds out of what's already there and enhances it.
Hi, I'm Steve Jeppe, and you're watching Fantastic Forum.
You have got to see this. A devoted fan of Star Trek from Great Britain has created his very own starship in his apartment. Tony Allen spent 10 years making the renovations, and as you can see, they are spectacular. He even has a transporter room. The windows have inserts that make them appear to view out into space, and there is a voice-activated computer system that turns on lights and consoles. Apparently, a friend gave Tony a Star Trek magazine, and he became obsessed with having his own starship. He'd split up with his wife and used the work as a kind of therapy. He did all the work himself and spent about 4,000 pounds, roughly 8,000 US dollars. Now, there's just one catch. His wife has been paying the mortgage since they split up, and now she wants to sell. And she doesn't want to sell the USS Voyager. Wife Georgina insists that the one-bedroom flat in Hinckley, Leicestershire, be placed on the market as a conventional property. That means that all Tony's work has to be dismantled. And as you might very well imagine, Tony is devastated. And I have to admit that I am too. If there was ever a situation in which it was cheaper to keep her, this is it. Good luck to you, Tony, or as the Klingons say, Qapla'.
To today's discussion, and today's discussion topic is animated series or cartoons that are based on comic book characters. So we've been talking about continuity. You know, these animated series over the years have also been very influential on comic books. They've been inspired by comic books, but some of the elements of these series have made their way. And like Abby, you mentioned Harley Quinn. And that's a good example of a character. And I think actually there were quite a few others on Batman the Animated Series that were created for that series and then crept their way into the comics. So in what other ways, I guess maybe you think of Batman Beyond too, that continuity has been accepted into the regular Batman comics. What other shows have had an influence on the comic books?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, basically, I would dare to say that the cartoon is more important, and I know this is blasphemy for some people, than the comic book. I think the continuity that was established in the cartoon was so good that forget about the comic book. Shredder was a secondary character, not that important in the comic book, and he became the antagonist, for crying out loud. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it depends a lot on when you sort of come into the thing. Like the 90s Batman was basically my big introduction to superheroes, right? So to me, that's always kind of been the canon. And then there are all these nice comic books. Look, they're about that character who was on the cartoon. Isn't it nice that they did? But, you know, I mean, I think in terms of influence, the cartoons tend to reach a lot more people and a very different audience. And, you know, like a little kid will come in and want to see, you know, Batman comics. Most of the Batman comics are not for the kids who watch the cartoons. So it really depends on what you're looking for and how much of a comic you're willing, or how much you're willing to pull back in order to make a comic accessible. Actually, I'm using Batman as an example, but it's not necessarily a very good one, because what I think really makes DC the best at animating or adapting animated shows is the fact that they don't tend to tone it down all that much. I still remember as a small child watching an episode of that show where Clayface made a little girl and sent her out to befriend Robin, and it was like traumatizing. And I haven't seen that episode in like 15 years, and I still remember being torn up that Robin had to lose his friend, the little girl who was made by Clayface.
Yes. Roberto?
Okay, here's a show that if you're not watching, you're in my bad list. Green Lantern, the new show. People keep telling me, oh, well, it's basically CG, blah, blah. It has some of the best writing for television that I've seen. The last episode, the season finale, was so fantastic. And they took so many mythos from Green Lantern, and even Star Trek, for crying out loud. Yeah. And they made it work. They explain everything in a way that is concise. They expand the universe. The characters are epic. The battles. There's a fight at the end where Kilowog basically is fighting an armada that comes from the Red Lanterns. And he's like, I really thought he was going to die. Really. And Mogo, of course, has to save the day. And when Mogo saves the day, and even then you talk, oh my God, they're going to kill Mogo. And then they bring the same Walker. And it's like, they're taking all these things from different times of Green Lanterns, different writers, and make it into cohesive canon. And I think the important thing is that you have to understand what makes a character work, what concepts you should keep. Green Lantern, basically, what they did is that they make changes, but they add, they expand, they explain the yellow impurity in a way that makes sense. And that's how you make it successfully. You expand, not tear down.
Right. And I think it's a fine line that they have to tread for these animated series and cartoons, because they have two audiences. They have an audience of kids and an audience of adults. They don't want to insult the adults, but they want to entertain the kids. Yes. And so that is a very fine line. So the good shows are able to tread that line well.
You're able to balance. You know, that's the thing. It's a tough thing to try to find a show that has that balance. And with certain, granted, we haven't talked about, we mainly talked about most of the American comics, but there are some like anime that came from manga comics that I highly like. The one show that I really been religiously watching has been Naruto, and it has that perfect balance of being serious and funny at the same time, and that's what a show should be. I've been telling some people at my job and some other friends, and he keeps saying, they love the reality shows or what have you. And it's like, please, and I end up saying, it's like, at work, I take a break, I go on YouTube or whatever and watch, some old shows or current shows online. And they ask, it's like, why do you keep watching cartoons? Because, and I told them this, I said, these shows have more depth, more decent storylines than any show you can see on television today, because these people take the time and effort to develop these characters to the point where they are now, from A to B. Yeah. And I think that's the sad thing about TV today. Everyone thinks it's a cartoon because, oh, that's just for kids. No, most of these shows I've been watching, an adult will sit and watch it. My father was, he got into like some of the, the Batman animated series when it first came out. He was enjoying it. He enjoyed, DuckTales a little bit too, because the thing is, because the characters were just, very engaging, very, it just captures you, and he figures like, oh, this is a very funny series, or a very entertaining series, and that's what animated shows should be. It shouldn't just be ha ha he he or all serious. It should be a little good balance so everybody can enjoy it.
Well, I think anime was really valuable in certain ways, because since the market is so large in Japan and they make it for all ages, when it started coming over here, you had material that initially people would sort of try to childize. For example, the main example I can think of is, of course, Sailor Moon, where in the third series first of all, it's terribly dumb. But in the third series, they bring in Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune, and in the Japanese version, they're lesbians. And in the American version, they dubbed over it so that they're cousins. But because it was
with a very close relationship.
Kissing cousins, all right.
Well animated that essentially all they were doing was adding incest to homosexuality. They started sort of to realize that they had a wider audience here, and that's, I think, what to a certain extent paved the way for things like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which drew a lot of inspiration from anime and the anime style in general, and it worked so well because it was a show that was made so that children could find it accessible and watch it, but at the same time, they weren't going to sort of stop telling the story because it got too dark. There was one episode where a character was bending other people's blood, and it was just the creepiest thing. But you know, it was still a kids' show, and they were writing it well. They were plotting it well. It was paced. It was an overarching story that worked really well.
I think basically what happened is that we are the spawn of the 80s. In the 80s, basically what happened was that there was deregulation on the networks, and basically cartoons that could not have been done before were being made, aka why we had a Rambo cartoon for crying out loud. But the thing is that allowed animators and guys to basically to experiment and to start taking control of the medium. Because if you see, you don't see us basically talking about how awesome Scooby-Doo was and how it could be reinterpreted. And there was like this dark period of animation during the 70s where most of the animation that came from TV was really, really aggressively dumb.
Well, that's because the drugs were all wearing off.
Hey, there was nothing wrong with H&R Puppet stuff, man.
I mean, everybody keeps talking, for example, about the Batman cartoon from the 90s, but nobody's talking about the Batman cartoon from the late 70s and the 80s.
It's because when you say Batman and you go that far back, everybody thinks of the panties. Live action show. I'm just saying.
Okay, so tell me this. Has there been a character in the comic books that has never had an animated series of his or her own that you really feel should have?
Wow.
So,
Fables.
yes.
Fables, okay, if we're going to go that route, Constantine would make an awesome cartoon in HBO. Fables would be a good, since basically Disney already beat them to the punch and did the TV show.
Oh my God, that awful TV show.
It has a lot of ratings.
It wants to be Fables so bad, and it's so not.
But we got there first. Birds of Prey actually would be a fantastic concept for a cartoon, but it's girls, and they assume.
But
they
it's
assume.
girls. But it's girls.
I didn't say that. You're on your own, man.
What I'm saying is that basically the way Hollywood thinks, the same reason they haven't done a Wonder Woman movie, because they assume incorrectly that, oh, it's girls, boys won't watch this.
You know what would be awesome that they could never do? Deadpool. Deadpool would make for a great cartoon if they could make it rated R.
All right, well, we are running out of time. It's been a great discussion. I want to thank very much our panel, discussion panel members for their participation.
Victory Comics. Victory. Thank you.
And thank you again to Victory Comics. And check us out online, fantasticforum.tv, and we will see you next time.
Victory! 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 Victory!
Join the Fantastic Forum fan community on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for all the latest news and updates.